Hello everyone. This video contains all the basic requirements needed for you to plan and design your adult leopard tortoises housing and enclosure. To keep these videos short and easy to reference, I will just be covering their indoor enclosure in this video. I will leave a link in the description for the video that covers the basic requirements for their outdoor enclosure for you. In both of these videos I'll be covering the items for you to consider when designing their enclosures that will give them an interesting space that's safe, warm, and it will be a healthy environment for them. I will also be doing videos on how I actually built the housing for my leopard tortoises, which covers the materials that I used from the insulation to the paint, etc. And it has some useful tips on the lessons learnt and things to avoid doing that will save you time and money from my experience. Once again, I'll leave the links to these videos in the description for you. So let's get started on the basic requirements for their indoor housing. The points that I'll be covering are the space required, the shed or greenhouse size, heating, basking and UVB, light, food, water, substrate, nesting area, hiding areas, thermometers and different terrains. So the first point is the space required. Adult leopard tortoises grow quite large. They can grow between 1 to 2 feet depending on the subspecies, and therefore they need lots of space to exercise and keep healthy. Also, they'll need enough space to be kept indoors for most, if not all, of the whole day when it's really cold and frosty. The minimum space required for one leopard tortoise's indoor and outdoor enclosure combined is 10 times the length of the tortoise squared. And if you have more than one tortoise, then you include the number of tortoises you have in the calculation. For example, 10 times the length of the tortoise by 10 times the length of the tortoise times the number of tortoises that you have. Once you've calculated the minimum area required, then I'd recommend that it's split as follows: 1/3 for their indoor area and 2/3 for their outdoor area. I'll go into detail on how to do these calculations in another video, and once again I'll leave the link in the description for you. Next we'll cover the shed or greenhouse size. Using the calculations we've just been through, the shed or greenhouse size required for one tortoise that's 1 foot long will be 6 foot by 6 foot. And two tortoises that are both 1 foot long, the shed size would need to be 8 foot by 8 foot, and 3 tortoises that are all 1 foot long, the shed size will be 10 foot by 10 foot. I've also included on this slide the more popular shed sizes that are available. Although I won't be covering in this video if a shed or greenhouse would work better for your tortoise's enclosure, I will be touching on some of the pros and cons for both of these as we go through the other basic requirements. Next we'll cover the heating required. The temperatures required for leopard tortoises are on this slide. I include this in most of my videos for leopard tortoises, but for those who haven't seen it, the temperatures required are 24 to 28 degrees C during the day, their basking area should be 30 to 32 degrees C, and nighttime temperatures should be around 22 degrees C. A couple of options that work well for heating your shed or greenhouse are greenhouse heaters. These aren't too expensive to buy, but the running costs of these tend to be quite high. I found them to be very reliable, and some have an inbuilt thermostat, so once you're set up it will maintain the temperature that you want. You may need more than one of these greenhouse heaters, depending on the area that you're heating, how well insulated it is, and how cold the temperatures get in the shed or greenhouse. There are more cost-effective options out there, for example using an oil-filled heater. Although these do cost more initially, they are cheaper to run compared to greenhouse heaters, depending on the area that you need to keep warm. You can also use other heaters like these thermostatically controlled heaters, but once again these may cost quite a bit to run. Or the ceramic bulb heaters, but once again you may need a few of these in your setup and they may cost quite a bit to run. So you'll need to do your research on what works best for you in your setup. Any heat source that you do use, you'll need to make sure you protect your tortoise from burning themselves against it, and you can use heater guards for this, but be careful not to restrict the airflow, and also you need to make sure the heat source doesn't come in contact with any water or condensation. On the subject of heating, you may find it easier and more cost-effective to keep a well-insulated shed within the safe temperature ranges in the colder months compared to a greenhouse, as greenhouses lose their heat very quickly at night, unless of course you're able to insulate your greenhouse too. Next we'll cover the basking area and UVB. You'll need to provide a basking area, and what I suggest for this is a basking bulb and holder that's suspended above an area for them to bask in. And directly under the basking bulb can either be their substrate of soil and sand, or you can use a paving slab or something similar that will warm up for them to bask on. The basking bulb should have UVA and UVB, like the bulb shown here. The reason why we need to provide them with a basking area is because tortoises are cold-blooded, and this means that they rely on external heat sources to regulate their temperature. So when we provide them a basking area, we provide them with heat, and then they can move in and out of the basking area to regulate their temperature. And this is called thermoregulation. Next we'll cover light. Ideally you should provide natural light for your tortoise in their indoor enclosure. So if you have a shed with windows or skylights, then this is ideal. And these can easily be covered up with insulation boards at night time to help keep the heat in. Or you could replace the windows with polycarbonate sheeting, and this will help keep the heat in as well as maximising the light you have in the shed. Greenhouses obviously provide plenty of natural light, but as I mentioned previously, the compromise of this is heat loss at night or on cold days. And also, unfortunately, the glass blocks UVB rays from the sun, which are necessary for your tortoise. If you don't have windows in your shed, or the windows that you're using are blocking UVB rays, then I'd recommend providing them with an additional UVB strip light, especially if the basking bulb is their only source of UVB. Next we'll cover their eating area. For this you'll need to provide a hard surface for them to eat their food off, and this will also help keep their beaks trim as they eat. I'd recommend a large terracotta saucer for this, or if you have more than one adult leopard tortoise, then a couple of paving slabs works really well, and then you can spread their food over the paving slabs so there's enough room for all of them to get to the food at the same time. Next we'll cover their drinking water. They'll need access to water to drink, so for this I'd recommend a large heavy bowl that they can easily drink from. I use a large plant saucer, so this one here is 16 inches in diameter by 2 inches deep, and this I got from a garden centre. You'll need to make sure it's heavy, otherwise when they step on the edge of it they could flip the bowl over and then no longer have any water left to drink. Not to mention that you would have to clean up a flood of water in your shed. Another option would be to build in a bathing area that has a gentle slope in and out of the bathing area. But you'll also need to take into consideration how you'll keep this clean. For example, how you're going to drain it, as they'll probably poo in the water, and this will need changing so they have fresh clean water every day. Tap water is fine to give them for drinking water, but a better alternative is either rainwater, filtered water or cooled boiled water. Next we'll cover their substrate. The substrate that I'd recommend is the same for the hatchling and juvenile leopard tortoises, so it's a mix of 50-50 topsoil or garden soil with play pit sand. The soil that you use needs to be free of any fertilisers or chemicals, and the sand you need to use is play pit sand rather than builder's sand. You don't need to cover the entire indoor area with this substrate, but as long as they have areas where they can dig down into. For example, their sleeping area and their basking areas. And that the area of soil is big enough so that all the tortoises can use it at the same time. The soil depth that I'd recommend is around 3/4 of their height, so it's approximately 6 to 8 inches deep for adult leopard tortoises. Next we'll cover the nest area. If you have adult female tortoises, then it's essential that you provide a suitable nest area for them. It's not unheard of for a female tortoise to produce eggs even if she hasn't been with a male tortoise, so it's important that they have a suitable area in case this is required. If you don't provide this, then she could potentially become egg-bound by holding onto her eggs, which could ultimately be fatal for your tortoise. The nest area should have the same substrate as before, so 50-50 soil and sand mixture, but this should be at least 2 feet deep as they dig a hole to lay their eggs. The nest area should be away from other tortoises so that she doesn't get disturbed and she can carry on digging and laying her eggs in peace. I have other videos on breeding leopard tortoises that go into a lot more detail on suitable nesting areas, so if you want more information on this then I'll leave a link in the description for you. Next we'll cover hiding areas. Leopard tortoises are shy and they like to have objects that they can hide in or under, or have areas where they can get away from other tortoises if they want to. So in an indoor enclosure you can achieve this by including in the design some visual barriers that will go from the ground up past their eye level or line of sight. For example, you could have plants or partition different areas like this. Or you could include large tunnels or tubing like this. Any objects that you use, is a good idea to have them weighted down, as leopard tortoises are quite strong and they could easily push these around their enclosure or tip them over. Next we'll cover thermometers. It's a good idea to have thermometers at various points in your tortoise's indoor accommodation. For example, the sleeping area, the basking area, and by the main door. When you're using a thermometer, make sure the probe is at ground level, i.e. where your tortoise is, as heat rises, and if you have the probe at your eye level, it won't be showing you the temperatures your tortoise is experiencing on the floor of the enclosure. There are lots of different choices available of thermometers, or ways you can monitor the heat in your tortoise's enclosure, and I have another video that summarises my recommended ones, and I'll leave a link in the description for you. The final item on our checklist of basic requirements is we want to introduce different terrains or levels in their indoor enclosure to keep their legs strong and keep your tortoise fit. This is a little more tricky in a small indoor shed compared to a garden, but a few ideas on what you could do are by introducing slopes, so for example a ramp up to their nesting or basking area, and this will help them use muscles as they walk up and down the ramp. But be careful not to make it too steep, otherwise they might not be able to use it. And also make sure your ramp has sides to it so they can't fall off and injure themselves. Another thing you could do is have their sleeping area at a different level to the main shed, and then create a slope to join the two together. And this will help keep their legs nice and strong compared to what they would be like if they were kept on a completely flat surface. You could also have different substrates or flooring. For example, the sleeping area could have a concrete floor with the substrate down one end. Having a hard surface like this concrete floor helps keep their nails trim as they walk across it, and it also prevents the floor rotting when you have wet soil in here. And where they eat and drink, you could use vinyl flooring. This also helps to keep it clean and is more hygienic for them. You could also have large pebbles or stones as a different terrain for them. Or you could have paving slabs in other areas like we talked about previously, so their feeding area and basking areas. These are just a few ideas for you, but as long as you try to avoid having a completely flat terrain and ideally introduce another hard surface, then this will be fine to get you started. One thing we haven't talked about yet is the electrical supply. You'll need to make sure that the electrical supply you're using can cope with the additional load of appliances required for your setup. And also make sure you have a couple of spare sockets in your design, as you may want to add other appliances at a later date. I'll be going through the electrical supply and appliance load in more detail in my build videos. You'll also need to make sure the cables on the appliance will reach from the sockets to where you want to position them. And also the cables won't come into contact with the appliance, or any water or condensation, or a tortoise. In addition to the basic requirements we've been through, there are a couple of other items that I found useful that I thought I'd share with you. I use a mister to spray the substrate if it gets too dusty. I also provide a smaller area within the shed so I can lock them in overnight. This will save you money on heating costs, as you'll only be heating a smaller area rather than the whole shed overnight. It's also worth thinking about how you could separate an area within their indoor enclosure in case one of your tortoises needs to be isolated from the others. For example, if they're ill, or if they're bullying the others, or if you want to monitor their behaviour or health closely. Another suggestion is to use a plastic curtain that's made up of either PVC strips or a rubber car mat that has been cut into strips. And I find these really useful in maintaining a steady temperature in their sleeping area, as well as the main shed when the shed door is open. I hope you found this video useful and it's given you some ideas on how you're going to design or make improvements to your adult leopard tortoises indoor enclosure. Also, if you have any other design tips or suggestions that you want to share with others, or you're going to try out some of the design ideas I've suggested in this video, then please leave your comments and feedback below, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching my video, and if you've enjoyed it, please click the thumbs up and subscribe to see my other videos.